Everyone good? Cool. We negate. Our sole contention is Kashmir. Pakistan has a mortal fear of Indian aggression and sponsors terrorism as a survival strategy. According to a 2011 article in The Economist, Pakistan was born from partition with India in 1947, a bloodbath that killed hundreds of thousands. Ordinary Pakistanis are conditioned to fret that India still not come to terms with the existence of their country and may one day simply come strolling in. Pakistan sense that jihadis are practical and unconventional means for a weak country to project power against a much bigger one. India's accession to the UNSC will terrify the Pakistani government and force them to adopt a more aggressive terror strategy for two reasons. First, India wants to cripple Pakistan's economy. Pakistan needs IMF loans to shore up its crumbling economy. Jeffrey Gettleman writes in the New York Times in 2019, with barely enough foreign reserves to cover monthly bills, Pakistan's government needs a large bailout from the IMF. On the streets, discontent is rising. The Pakistani government's decision to raise levies on fuel and collect more taxes from ordinary Pakistanis have made people even angrier. However, as a member of the Security Council, India would cut off that lifeline to punish Pakistan. Amir Khan of the University of Balochistan explains in 2015 that in the UNSC, the economic power of India could be devastating for Pakistan. As a permanent member, India could use influence over the IMF, such as financial institutions such as the IMF, to prevent Pakistan's access. This would deal a debilitating blow to Pakistan's economy. Second is India wants to shutter peace. Pakistan sees UN mediation as the only long-term way to solve the Kashmir dispute between India and Pakistan. Reddy 16 writes in The Hindu that the resolution of the Kashmir dispute is only possible through the realization of right to self-determination of the people of Kashmir as per UNSC resolutions through a fair and impartial plebiscite under UN auspices. However, India opposes any UN involvement in Kashmir and would use a seat on the Security Council to make sure that the UN works to its interests, destroying Pakistan's hope in a neutral actor. David Bosco of India University writes that a council with India as a permanent member that passed resolutions condemning Pakistan would look less legitimate than today. This would convince Pakistan that there are no peaceful routes out. Overall, Shamsa Nawaz of the Institute of Strategic Studies writes in 2017 that with India's presence on the Security Council, the very existence of Pakistan will be endangered since the division of the subcontinent remains a sore point. India's seat on the Security Council would force Pakistan to double down on terror, striking at India's heart. As a comparison, the Brookings Institute explains in 2018 that Pakistan's persistent acquiescence to safe havens for the Afghan Taliban and the vicious Haqqani brands has resulted in significant destabilization of Afghanistan. India would be forced to respond with incredible aggression to major terrorist attacks. Similarly, after the 9/11 attacks, policymakers in the US had no choice but to invade Afghanistan to protect the country. Ragjai Dissent magazine writes in 2003 that Indian strategists have argued that India should be prepared to fight limited war under nuclear conditions, that is, military operations of a limited conventional nature in response to Pakistan's terror. Pakistan's fight back against India, and they have their base strategy in military strategy around deploying tactical nuclear weapons to counteract India's conventional superiority. Herrera of the Pacific Standard writes in February that Pakistan could plausibly deploy a nuke in response to a conventional attack since they maintain a smaller army than India that would be overwhelmed if the Indian military invaded. Facing national collapse, Islamabad could launch a nuclear weapon to even the playing field. An Indo-Pak war is uniquely dangerous because there are none of the checks that normally prevent nuclear escalation. Rising nationalism in both countries and deterioration of dialogue between the two leads Foreign Policy magazine to conclude that if a terrorist attack were to occur today, both India and Pakistan could not de-escalate the crisis. In addition, conventional deterrence doesn't work here. Since Lennon of CNN writes this year that were the situation to deteriorate for them, nukes could be used before commanders in Islamabad could stop them. Pakistan has a strategic policy of delegating nuclear release approval down to lower tactical level units. Lower-level bellicose commanders using tactical nuclear weapons if they see fit. Thus, Shankar of the New York Times writes in 2002 that a full-scale nuclear exchange could kill up to 12 million people immediately. Even a more limited nuclear war would have cataclysmic results. Thus, we negate.
Okay. Is everybody ready? We affirm, and our sole contention concerns increasing peacekeeping contributions. RAPA, the global peace operations in 2017, quantifies that over the last several years, the average gap between authorized and deployed peacekeeping personnel has widened, with the average shortfall per mission in 2017 being 1,500 troops. Unfortunately, Office Area of Foreign Affairs in 2018 furthers that too few people on the ground makes it difficult for the UN to scratch the surface of their mandates. Fortunately, granting India a permanent seat increases troop contributions in 3 ways. First is keeping India in the game. Williams of the Small Wars Journal in 2012 furthers that increasingly, India stated that its future peacekeeping contributions will be less automatic and more tied to greater involvement in the process. In fact, donors NYU in 2018 specifies that India has avoided getting involved in efforts in Mali and the Central African Republic. This is because India sees itself as a global power. Dr. of JNU in 2017 writes that India is no longer satisfied with being a mere follower of international norms and instead wants to shape them. Granting India a permanent seat will help it recommit to peacekeeping. Dr. further says as a permanent member, India would assume the mantle of international security decision-making. The high seat on the table would provide it leverage to expand its clout globally. India is integral to peacekeeping operations. Vampili, a Vassar in 2018 writes that India is the second largest contributor of peacekeepers with personnel operating 8 of 16 operations. Thus, Williams concludes that even small reductions in India's support can degrade the viability of existing missions. Second is incentivizing others to follow. Cavalon of the University of Western Australia in 2010 concludes that Germany and Japan, which are major contenders for a permanent seat, have been showing signs of increased interest in UN peace missions, creating a greater need for India to take on a leadership role. Empirically, Neethling of the University of Pretoria in 2015 finds that China learned from India the importance of increasing its power at the UN through peacekeeping. Gimper of the University of Berlin in 2014 confirms that China is now the biggest troop contributing country with permanent members with a share of 57%. Third is scaling down offensive mandates. De Silva of NYU in 2017 explains that the Council has introduced a new trend of peacekeeping missions deployed often where there's ongoing conflict. These missions do not have realistic mandates and are likely to face significant obstacles and fatalities. In fact, Henke of the International Peace Institute in 2018 quantifies that such mandates have increased peacekeeping fatalities by 15%. India would protect peacekeepers as a permanent member. Historically, Mukherjee of Princeton in 2013 explains that when India had a rotating seat on the Council in 2011 and 2012, it decried the increasingly ambitious mandates of UN peacekeeping operations. This is important as Gao of Pew Research in 2016 writes that peacekeeping mandates must be approved by all permanent members. Thus, ToC of Global India in 2018 concludes that better consultation with troop contributing countries will prevent the Council from formulating overly ambitious mandates. Fewer fatalities means increased contributions, as Lebanon College in 2019 confirms that after experiencing just 5 fatalities, a country reduces its contribution by 44 peacekeepers. This has already materialized, as Nepal is pulling out troops from Libya, Japan from South Sudan, and Canada from Mali. Thus, Brodsky of the University of Witwatersrand in 2018 concludes that starting a debate on the effect of missions on the ground is essential to avoid a drastic and potentially dangerous scaling down of peacekeeping operations. Any increase in troop capacity results in improved global stability. As more peacekeepers can better protect civilians and craft long-term peace accords. Shannon of Colorado in 2013 confirms that as peacekeeping operations are increasingly supplied with soldiers, violence against civilians decreases. Just 500 UN police nearly eliminate civilian deaths. Rogeri of Oxford in 2016 furthers that even a small deployment of 20 peacekeepers reduces the probability that conflict continues by 15 percentage points. Fortin of Colombia in 2004 confirms that while offensive enforcement missions only create unstable peace, traditional peacekeeping reduces the risk of war by about 86%. In fact, in sum, the UN in 2018 writes that peacekeeping has directly impacted hundreds of millions of people. Thus we affirm. I'm ready for cross.
Can I see first the cards about like countries pulling out like Nepal from Libya, the other example to read?
Yeah.
And then the Shannon evidence about 500 peacekeepers getting no civilian deaths.
Yeah.
So, your second argument is about sending signal. You argue that India is sending less peacekeepers right now.
They're pulling out missions.
Okay. So,
Or they're avoiding getting into missions.
okay, so if your argument is about sending a signal, and if India is sending less peacekeepers, that means that the way that India gets in the council is by sending less peacekeepers, and that's what other countries
Well, that's
see,
not
right?
true. Because we would argue that the reason why they get on the council is not that they're peacekeeping right now. The reason why they get on the council is the historical contributions of their peacekeepers. That's why they're getting on the council.
Danny, that doesn't
That's
make
why it's a
sense.
debate
Danny,
topic for
Danny,
us.
that just doesn't make sense. Like, the entire reason why India is sending less peacekeepers is because they're trying to hold the UN hostage. They're saying, look,
No.
you need our, yes, they're saying, look, you need our contributions. That's all
Yeah,
the warranting that you need about why peacekeepers
So
are
in
necessary.
order to
for mission.
hold the UN hostage, you need to contribute a lot of peacekeepers in the first place. That's what Germany and Japan would see. ask a
What?
question?
Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. They did initially contribute a lot, but then the way that they eventually changed, which is what India's calculus is by sending less.
True,
So what Germany and Japan are
okay.
saying, well, one second.
Even
So
if
what,
that argument, I understand your argument.
Yeah.
Even if it's true, Germany and Japan, in order to hold them hostage, need to increase their contributions in the first place. That's not happening right now. It would happen.
well, wait, so, but
Can I ask a
then
question?
even if they initially contributed, then they would just
Alright,
hold
no.
them hostage even
I'm
more.
gonna ask a question, right?
Well, what incentive does any country
Okay, so
have
this
to
is
send
number 4.
more
Can I ask a question,
peacekeepers?
please? Okay. So, can you explain to me the difference between the terrorism you talk about will happen in your case and the terrorism that happened 2 months ago in February?
Right. So the terrorism that happened in February was one attack, which was pretty bad.
That's usually how terrorism goes.
Yeah,
one attack.
pretty bad. But well, no, our argument is that that Pakistan's foreign policy shifts to one that entirely relies on terrorism. To
That's
combat
not what
Indians.
your
There was a
evidence
huge
says.
increase
Your
in
evidence
attack.
says that they doubled down, which is incredibly vague. So, like,
No,
what does that
our
mean?
evidence indicates that this is the only way that they can. This is historically how they've defended themselves. But since they can
Okay.
no longer go to the UN,
Yeah,
they
so
have
let's
to
talk about
focus on
that.
terrorism as the only way to defend
So you
themselves.
say-
so they greatly ramp up
so
attacks. So I'll actually
why
give you,
would-
but Danny, I'll give you a good example.
Well, I'm gonna ask for example. So my follow-up question to that is, you say that in your world or in our world, they can no longer go to the Council for Mediation.
Yep.
So over the last 40 or however long years, can you give me one example of when Pakistan going to the Council for Mediation did anything to help them in Kashmir?
Yeah, that's
When?
the example I was going to read you 2 months ago when they got into the little, kerfuffle. They went to the council and they said,
Killed 50 people.
yeah, I mean, compared to what? That's fair, but again, it's compared to what it would be, which would be hundreds of people, and that's the evidence that we read about in Afghanistan. The terror networks that they support there have
Okay,
literally
so
killed
can you
hundreds of
answer-
thousands
okay,
of people.
but you
Yeah,
sidetracked.
Pakistan went to the
That's my
council to mediate after the attack. That's the example I was going to
Okay,
give.
what happened?
The conflict died down because we're not at war. Can I ask you a
The
question?
conflict didn't die down. Tensions are incredibly high.
They are, but we're not
question
in
here-
war. We're
My
not
question here
fighting
is,
this war.
what land or what physical attributes has Pakistan gained in Kashmir as a result of mediation through the
It's
council?
not that they have necessarily done better, it's that they've had the option of going to the council, which means that they are there to potentially defend themselves.
The option doesn't work. I'm not gonna go there.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Great. Let's begin. Let's start with an overview on our case. The most important impact in this round is ensuring that a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan does not start. Look, I would like to come up here and tell you that nuclear war is a ridiculous impact and will never happen. But this conflict is uniquely likely, and I would say that we have to be very careful about it for a couple of reasons. The first one comes from our economist evidence at the top of our case, where the economist explains that both Pakistan and India have deeply rooted and entrenched fears of each other. That both countries fear that neither has accepted each other's existence and will do anything to ensure that any threat by one is countered by the other. 2, our Herrera evidence indicates that Pakistan has developed tactical nuclear weapons specifically to counter an Indian conventional incursion. That because Pakistan loses every single day to an Indian invasion with tanks and planes, they have to escalate to the nuclear level. But 3, our foreign policy evidence indicates that while in the past, India and Pakistan have been able to resolve diplomatically, that now there are no diplomatic back channels between them, and China and the US are not coming in. There's no way for them to de-escalate. And 4th, our London evidence indicates that because Pakistan has a strategy of delegating nukes to low-level commanders, mutually assured destruction does not apply. Because for them in a bunker on the front lines, the most logical step is to launch a nuke or they die. Go to their case. We're going to go out of order a little bit because I think it makes a little more sense. Let's start on their third link. It's going to become really important later. Okay, a couple problems with this. The first problem here is that they say that people are pulling troops because they are getting killed. Like they use this Nepal example and whatever. This evidence does not say that. People give peacekeepers for clout. Countries give peacekeepers because they want to be on the UNSC and so they're contributing to international organizations. We call for their evidence. And the Nepal example said this. Nepal pulled peacekeepers because it has a mandated 12 months, and after the 12 months, it pulled them. That makes a lot of sense. There's no link to their argument. Their evidence does not say what they say it says. But 2, they say that defensive peacekeeping makes peacekeepers safer. This is ridiculous. Defensive peacekeeping means that peacekeepers cannot defend themselves. Offensive peacekeeping allows them to fight back. If anything, the fatalities will increase in the enrollment to use defensive peacekeeping, so nations will pull more, turning their link. But 3, this argument doesn't make a lot of sense because there have been a lot of historically successful offensive peacekeeping missions. For example, the UN has broke up wars in Sierra Leone and Liberia, lasted for 10 years, and the intervention in Libya, although most critics thought it as a bad intervention, according to Brookings, actually its mandate to save civilians actually worked, and the civil war was 3 years after the intervention intervention ended. So clearly, there are enough peacekeepers for success. But fourth, defensive peacekeeping operations are terrible. Defensive peacekeeping, basically the UN comes in and acts as a mediator and says, we're not going to get on either side, but please don't kill each other. But Clark explains that what happened in the 90s in Rwanda and Bosnia is that because peacekeepers stood by, hundreds of thousands were massacred. We cannot let this happen. But fourth, offensive is better for two reasons. A, because it increases the cost of conflict. As Holtman explains in 2014, when peacekeepers are actually on the ground and become a third party and say to both parties, if you keep fighting, we will attack you, that dramatically raises the cost of conflict and decreases the likelihood of genocide. But B, it also provides a security guarantee. Because in a war, neither the insurgents nor the government wants to lay down their arms because the other side doesn't trust each other. But peacekeepers get a security guarantee to both sides and say, if you lay down your arms and come to the table, we will talk. That's what Holtman explains. And empirically, Hager finds that offensive operations are more successful and reduce the length of conflict and reduce the probability of conflict starting again. Now let's go to their first two links. The third link takes out their first two links, because even if India gives more or less peacekeepers, that does not matter. The use of peacekeepers is what matters. Because peacekeepers are not used for good purposes and cannot be effective, it does not matter the number of peacekeepers that are being given. But let's go to their first links, two turns. First explains from Krishnani 10 is that the only reason why India gives any peacekeepers at all is to get clout and to get onto the UNSC. Once they're on the UNSC, there's literally no reason for them to give peacekeepers. And as evidence of this fact, none of the P5 nations, not the US, not the UK, not Russia, even though they have massive militaries, give anywhere near the top 25 or top 50 amount of peacekeepers. The US literally has like 20 peacekeepers. But two, their own Memphilly card concludes for our side. What Memphilly is really saying is that India actually pulled troops from the Congo to prevent a UN intervention in Libya. If India is on the UNSC, they will use their political clout for their own ends. India does not like offensive operations like what happened in Libya, and they will use their clout on the UNSC to prevent those operations, and doing so, they will cut off peacekeepers. So we turn their link. Now let's go to their second warning about others following. Noah points out the really big hole in this, which is that in their first warrant, they say that India is going to tie the amount of peacekeepers to being on the council. India is holding the council hostage and saying that we're going to decrease peacekeepers. If you give them the carrot, if you put them on the council, that sets a really bad precedent. That all nations should just cut off peacekeepers, and then the council will be so afraid and put them on the council. Germany and Japan don't contribute almost any peacekeepers, but the major contributors like Ethiopia and Pakistan and Bangladesh would certainly contribute less because they think they can hold the US hostage, and this sets a bad precedent and actually turns their link. Thank you. Please engage.
Read it in summary, and I see the word listed in the first one.
Which one?
The one outside using the SC.
Yeah.
We're gonna go just down as rebuttal, and then whatever is over you want. Okay, is everyone ready? They give 4 reasons why a nuclear conflict could happen between India and Pakistan. The first is that they're really afraid of each other, but a lot of countries are really afraid of each other. Most importantly, we would tell you in this scenario, because there's no historical precedent of Pakistan actually using their nuclear weapons, they have to prove that some sort of solvency is actually possible there. But moreover, we would say on their second war, when they say they use tactical nuclear weapons in response to Indian conventional war has happened before. India fired weapons into Pakistani territory in February. They did the same thing in 2016, and there was a mini-conventional war in 1999 in Kargil. Clearly, there's no example of Pakistan using its nuclear weapons because they think it's important to their economy. But then, the third response is that Pakistan has no diplomatic channels. That doesn't make any sense, because at the point where the U.S. and other actors intervene to stop Pakistan and India from increasing the conflict back in February, like China, there's clearly some sort of negotiation that can solve the problem right now. And lastly, they say that these military officers are in the bunker, but again, the historical examples are on our side. Even if there are some issues with Pakistan's loose nukes, it is not sufficient to trigger a nuclear war because none of their evidence says that, and it hasn't happened before. Then, on the top of our case, even if you grant them all of their turns on offensive peacekeeping, it doesn't matter. At the point where he drops the RAPA evidence and says that they lack 1,500 troops, and Anasari tells you that that means that mandates fail. The evidence at the bottom of our case from Ruggieri tells you that adding 20 peacekeepers leads to a 15% decrease in conflict duration. So if we have a link to increase the amount of troops, it betters offensive and defensive mandates. We are a prerequisite to them. Let's go to our third warrant on scaling down dangerous mandates. They say they do it for clout anyway, and they give our own evidence. Our evidence says no. Nepal's pulling out because Libya has become increasingly dangerous for them them, and our De Silva evidence and Brosig evidence tells you that this is the main reason why countries are pulling out, because they don't want to risk their own troops. This is more important than just international cop, because there's domestic backlash. Then they say offensive operations allow them to fight back, but De Silva evidence is good in saying that they are placed in places where they have no success in fighting back, because they're not equipped to do so. We say UN peacekeeping is best made traditional, that's why it's been so successful in the past. They give examples of Sierra Leone and Libya. We also have examples in our case where defensive succeeds, like Cambodia and Laos. But specifically look at Libya, the most important thing here is he says the civil war reoccurred 3 years after. That's because when you have offensive operations, you can never have a successful peace according to the long term, because Blair 05 Princeton explains that you alienate one side of the conflict, which makes the conflict go on forever. Even if you have short-term success in the long term, it reoccurs, which is why the important evidence tells you that our peacekeeping operations decrease long-term war by 86%. Then they say that they could have stopped genocides in Rwanda, but the problem there was they didn't get there in time, because even with traditional peacekeeping, you can still protect civilians, which is why our unnecessary evidence tells you that a lack of troops in the UN cannot deploy missions fast enough. That is a reason to vote for us. Then they say there's two reasons why offensive mandates are better, because A, there's direct retaliation, but as Libya 11 explains that when there's a threat of direct intervention, the government resorts to genocide because they believe it's the only way to achieve their political objectives. He says this happened in Darfur and Kosovo. But second, they say that there's security guarantee to both sides. No, the security guarantee is gone because there's no credible success of the UN as a legitimate actor if they take one side. Let's go to their case. Their first link is about the economy, but there's no warranting why India gets so much influence on the IMF. They're the second least, comparatively least represented on the IMF right now. But second, Hyder 17 explains that the IMF has failed in Pakistan for the last 28 years. They've had 10, 12 loan programs. Their economy still sucks. And April 18 explains this is because they can implement austerity, which he says would transform their current crisis into a full-blown recession. Let's go to their second link where they talk about peace. Their card only says that Pakistan went to the UNSC. It did not say the UNSC succeeded. Don 19 explains that India rejected UNSC mediation in February. The reasoning comes from Brand 11, who explains that India does not take the UN seriously in the status quo because they believe it's illegitimate because they don't have a permanent member. So the only way to solve that is get India on the council. But second, Satish 16 explains that you're not going to fundamentally change the security dynamic between India and Pakistan because Pakistan is so much worse than India right now, which is why on their impact, Tells 19 explains that Pakistan won't change. They're still going to support terrorism, and the Pakistani army controls their government, so they're still going to do terrorism. But then, Sahi 19 explains that India is becoming more apt to respond with military force as what happened in February, but the only way to solve this is Bosco 14, who explains that when there's more mediation between the UN Security Council and more meetings between the US and India, there's a decreased chance of miscalculation.
Is the evidence that the U.S. intervened in the February conflict?
The US?
Yeah, you said that in the February, the U.S. led mediation. Is everyone ready? Great. Let's begin. So I want to talk a bit about the historical example you brought up in the rebuttal about the Kargil War. You say that in the Kargil War, India, there was some limited conventional strike warfare. Pakistan did not go nuclear, right? Why was that?
We would say that there's a lot of reasons why Pakistan.
Well, the main reason was because Bill Clinton stepped in and convinced Pakistan not to, right?
Okay, again, like, why can't the U.S. do that in the status quo?
Let's talk about that. So the U.S. can't do that in the status quo because relations with Pakistan have soured incredibly.
Why can't China do that? Why can't China do that in the status quo?
Because one, China is not an ally of Pakistan, and since they don't have a security guarantee, they have limited economic relations. And two, China is a rival of India, meaning if China got involved, it would be looking like it would be on Pakistan's side and not India. In fact, we have evidence that indicates that if the U.S. and China were to get involved today, it would actually make the conflict worse. Because the U.S. and China would want to play each other off each other.
That doesn't make any sense, right? There's no reason why that would make the conflict worse if both sides are saying you should de-escalate. Because the U.S. and China don't.
No, that was not my point. My point was that the U.S. backs India, but China backs Pakistan. And that because both the U.S. and China are vying for influence, both sides have an incentive to show that they are pro each side.
They also have a disincentive to have an escalatory nuclear conflict there, right? Like the United States.
Sure, but it looks really bad if the U.S. backs off instances like India, don't take this Pakistan thing seriously.
So,
they're not really playing. After Pakistan launched a major attack on a major Indian city like Mumbai or New Delhi.
What happened 2 months ago?
Okay, here's what happened 2 months ago. So you say that the U.S. intervened. Here's what Trump said. He said, quote, it would be wonderful if India and Pakistan were to get along and be friends. That does not sound like intervention. That sounds like
Yeah, I mean,
Trump
I
sort
just
of
gave
not
the
doing
evidence
anything.
that says, like, the Secretary of State was like, in
I read your evidence, and it says
communication
Mike
with-
Pompeo tried to call both leaders, and Mike Pompeo said, I think things went well. But I'm not
I
willing to
mean,
judge
I mean,
the
do you
credibility
think
of the Trump
like,
administration right now.
No one
okay,
said
in
it
terms
did
of
well. It
resolving
did go
conflicts.
well in February because they were able to de-escalate. He called it a kerfuffle. So
Right, but why were they able to? They were not able to de-escalate because Pakistan turned to the U.S. Well, where were they able to turn to?
whatever it
The
was.
UN.
No, it wasn't, because our evidence says, your evidence just says Pakistan appealed to the UN
Yes.
for deliberation. Our evidence
Yes.
says India rejected the deliberation.
Yes.
So our evidence is better. Pakistan does not see the UNSC as a viable place for
No,
mediation.
no. India rejects. That is our argument. India rejects the UNSC. India doesn't use the UNSC as a dialogue method, right? They don't want to. But Pakistan sees that as long as it can turn to the UNSC in a time of crisis, it has some diplomatic
But
way
the
out.
UNSC
The
didn't do
problem
anything.
is that if
Wait.
no,
That doesn't make sense. If the UNSC doesn't get anything done for Pakistan, they don't turn to it with success. That's why
No,
they still do
they
terrorism.
do. Pakistan places all of its hopes on the long-term peaceful settlement of Kashmir on
So
on
for
the
the
UNSC.
past,
That's what our evidence
for the
indicates.
past like 40, ever since like partition, right? For
Mhm.
the past 70 years, the UNSC hasn't succeeded in doing anything, and Pakistan still trusts it. And why
No,
there's so
no.
much
The
terrorism?
UNSC has promised Pakistan that it will get them a long-term settlement in
When?
Kashmir,
Like, it's
and
been 70
Pakistan
years.
has relied on that.
They
This is our
haven't,
point.
clearly, because they're using
This is
terrorism.
our point. Pakistan either can choose between this diplomatic route or external terrorism. We'll take questions.
Okay. Order goes their first contention. Our case. The turn for Krishna. Yeah. Okay. Alright. Sandeep makes a really big mistake when he gets up here and says that the amount of peacekeepers matters. That's fine, we'll concede that. But he also concedes the turn. That when India gets on the Security Council, they have no need to use any more peacekeepers because they're already on the council, they have a permanent seat, there's no need to send them in. And they drop our evidence that the P5, there's not a single P5 member who is in the top 10 country, in the top 10 amount of peacekeeping. That means when India gets on the council, they send less peacekeepers, which means we win their case. That also means that other countries have an incentive to hold the UN hostage, like the developing countries who are sending more peacekeepers now. That means that all their contributions tank. Very easy way vote for us. But with that, let's go back to our case. What we tell you on the overview is that the India-Pakistan conflict is one that is historic, and both countries since their inception have been pressed on annihilation. Group all of his responses. They are all about how nuclear war has never happened in the past, but he drops all of the nuances in our case about why nuke war is uniquely likely now. He says in the Cold War it didn't spill over, but our case is about why there's no more trilateral mediation or bilateral mediation, which is what got them out of it in the past. Then he says just that the U.S. can intervene, but as Daniel tells you in rebuttal, all Trump said was, I hope things can work out. And it makes sense that Trump doesn't want to mediate the conflict. What our foreign policy evidence indicates is because he's more concerned about things like isolationism and not getting impeached. But even if Trump doesn't, remember, and you need the U.S. because even if to say that you can just engage China, you need the U.S. to engage India because China can't engage India in mediation because they're not friends. But even if China and the U.S. both do mediate, our foreign policy evidence indicates that they would just play play both powers against each other because the U.S. and China are competing for great power politics, so they want to increase their hedge by making their side win. But then we say that when India joins the Security Council, that means that Pakistan can no longer turn to them for mediation, and they are forced to turn to terror in order as the only way to protect themselves, which leads them down the path of warning those 12 million people. Their first response is that that Pakistan can't go to the UNSC. Look, it doesn't matter if the conflict isn't over, insofar as it hasn't boiled into war, that means it's working for Pakistan. Then he says that terror can't get worse. If that's the only tactic they rely on, there's a huge spike. That is when terror boils over and it leads to nuclear war. You prefer this, our arguments on magnitude and scope, 12 billion people, far more than their small peacekeeping argument.
Alright, we'll take our time.
Okay, so it'll be our case, then their offense with the overview and their case. Is everybody ready? Starting on the turns. Okay, first turn says that India will stop giving peacekeepers, but obviously that looks really bad for their global image, and we tell you that they still need power and they still need their global image when they're on the council. The second turn, they're going to hold them hostage, but they drop the responsibility, say for crossbar, they don't really interact with it. The G4 countries are the only countries that have a chance of getting on the council, need to increase their peacekeepers in the first place, even hold them hostage. That's an analysis that is dropped. At that point, Sandeep frontlines all the responses to our third link, none of which are extended by NOAA. This is clean offense. The Mukherjee evidence tells you that India opposes offensive mandates, which are happening right now. This is two implications. First is 11 which tells you that these offensive mandates kill a lot more peacekeepers, which leads to a decrease in contribution. The second implication, that offensive mandates are just a lot worse. And the warrant behind this is the evidence that he reads in his own rebuttal, which is in, for example, in Libya, when offensive mandates happen, even if they end civil wars, they reoccur often afterwards because they don't create long-term peace. That's their own analysis. There's two implications of this argument. The impact comes here from the important evidence drop, which shows that traditional peacekeeping is to an 86% decrease in conflict. There are two ways to weigh this argument. A is on historical precedent, because we know that peacekeeping is happening right now. We know what will change. In their case, nuclear war has never happened, even if they can talk about back channels. But B is on uniqueness, because we tell you that terrorism is happening right now, tensions are really high right now, but in the status quo, countries are pulling out of peacekeeping. That's the examples we give you. That point, let's go to the overview. They tell you that there are no back channels right now, but they contradict us at the point when they tell you that the mediation works between China and the United States. They just tell you that China and the United States have an interest in fighting against each other. But obviously they'll put that aside to avoid nuclear war. No country wants nuclear war because that would hurt the United States and China, even if they're not allies with these countries. At that point, let's go to their case. There are a couple of problems. They tell you that they have to decide between diplomacy and terror. At the point when they're choosing terror right now, a few months ago, it proves that Pakistan does not trust the council. That's why their only analysis is that Pakistan went to the council. The Dawn analysis tells you that India rejected this, which proves that going to the council is not enough. The second response is a turn that tells you that the only way to change this possibly, is to get India to trust the council more, and they're going to take it more seriously once they're on the council. That's a drop turn on their case. Terminal defense and a turn. Vote for us.
Okay, is everyone ready? Great. Let's begin. So, I want to ask you a little bit about the response you just read to me. You said in summary that India, even though it's on the Security Council, still needs some clout for some purposes, and it looks bad if they're blocking peacekeeping, right? So what do they need clout for if they're already at the high table?
Yeah, I could give you a few examples.
They have veto already, right? Why do they need?
Well, it's not just about the veto. If India looks like a illegitimate actor once they're on the council, then countries will But also, for that argument to be true, you need to prove that the pinnacle of all world power is the council. Obviously, there are other things they
we can
want
both
to do.
agree that the UNSC is the most important international institution.
There are a lot of other things like financial institutions.
Okay, so but to win that, you have to win that current P5 members follow international
So
rules.
if what you were saying is true,
Yeah, China's increasing peacekeepers right now.
wait, guys, the analysis, guys, the analysis that we read that has been dropped the whole round is that there is not a single member of the P5 who is in the top 10. How many peacekeepers, how many peacekeepers does the US give? 20.
But that doesn't prove.
We have 20.
No.
Obviously, we don't care about our global credibility.
But that
by
doesn't
sending
prove
peacekeepers.
that once India gets on, they'll decrease it. That just proves that a country that was always on the council didn't put them in. That doesn't prove that once India gets on, that's not the same argument, man.
What it does prove is it's the warrant comparison, which proves that once you're on the council, you don't need to send peacekeepers for credibility. Because if it was true that you needed to send peacekeepers for credibility,
because
then
the
they would
United
be sending
States
more
does not
peacekeepers.
get its credibility from peacekeepers. The United States gets its credibility from world policing and IMF stuff. India, however, gets its credibility from peacekeeping, not like India, or not like the United States, and not like
bad
China.
at the UN.
What?
For research for this topic, I would read General Assembly transcripts a little bit. I'm a little nerd. And they say, we don't think the U.S. is contributing enough. We don't think the U.S. is contributing enough. The U.S. is not being a good actor. None of the General Assembly countries think that the P5 is doing their fair share.
But
so
the argument that I just said is that the United States does not derive its legitimacy in the council through peacekeeping. They have a lot of other ways. India, however, which we both agree on, derives its credibility to get onto the council through peacekeeping. So once they're on the council, if they stop doing peacekeeping, they have no credibility, unlike the United States. It's a different comparison.
Okay, do you ask a question?
We can ask one?
Yeah.
Alright, so, my question is, recently, right? February, what prevented them from going to war?
You say they went to the UN.
And so,
What did the UN do? when
Yeah,
they
what
went
did
there?
the UN do?
It's look. The point of our argument isn't that the UN is making Kashmir a peaceful region.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's no conflict.
Okay.
But the point is that it is a
So-
route of. Hold on. Can I answer your question? Is that is a route for Pakistan to go to, but two,
Yeah.
the fact that India hasn't invaded them and there is
So-
relative peace, that means it's a
The-
viable
my
option.
question here is if Pakistan's really mad, they want to fight India, they go to the council, and then India's like, I don't want to talk to you, and the council says we can't do anything about it. How does that solve anything? Why does that make them less likely to go to war?
It doesn't matter because Pakistan
It doesn't
still
matter.
has somewhere to go.
But there's just,
If
it's
they-
like going,
Alright, 30 seconds? Take that.
Okay, is everyone ready? Great. Let's begin. There's two places that you can negate. The first one is on their case, on their terms. The first one from Krishna explains that India gives peacekeepers to get on the UNSC. They want to look like a good international steward, and they want to show that they're contributing to international institutions to get on the UNSC. That's their whole campaign. It is a political strategy. But putting them on the UNSC removes the only incentive that they have to give up troops. And no country wants to give their troops away to international organizations. They don't have an incentive to. That is why none of the P5 nations give substantial amounts of troops. Our own Mampili evidence confirms the fact that when India gets more power, it uses it badly. That India would use its power on the UNSC to use it for its own interests and decrease peacekeepers. This is a term that they have dropped in summary, and we give the better war comparison showing that none of the P5 members give any peacekeepers. The countries that do give the most peacekeepers are like Ethiopia and Pakistan and Bangladesh, countries that also coincidentally have had the fiercest campaigns to be on the council. We're winning this turn. But it also sets a bad precedent, which is the other part of the turn, which is that if India can show that, that the best way to get on the council is by decreasing peacekeeping, then the rest of the G4 and these other countries are going to say, well, our strategy should change too, to also give less peacekeeping, to make the UN wake up and say, hey, we got to put them on the council so we don't get rid of all of our peacekeepers. This sets the precedent that Germany and Japan and Ethiopia and Pakistan should all decrease their own peacekeepers, and a bad precedent that decreases peacekeeping anywhere. The second place that you can negate is on our case by stopping nuclear war between India and Pakistan. What we say is the tensions are uniquely high right now. Our foreign policy evidence says that they're on the brink, and if there were a terrorist attack today, they could not de-escalate because there is no mediation. We got out of Kargil and other past crises because the U.S. and because these other actors stepped in. However, as Noah explained in summary, and they dropped, the U.S. and China are both unwilling to step in. Trump makes outlandish comments, and China is an enemy of India. They cannot mediate. The only risk out of the conflict is what Pakistan sees in the UNSC. Pakistan sees in the UNSC a way to long-term solvency in Kashmir. What our evidence explains is that Pakistan would lose in a bilateral negotiation over Kashmir every single time because India is the superior power. But because the UNSC is a multilateral institution, Pakistan has always retained the hope that it can turn to the UNSC and get a partition of the Kashmir region. By affirming, you shut the door in Pakistan's face, and they have to turn a terror which kills 12 million people and forces escalation. They try to turn our argument, but one, it was explained differently in summary. But two, it's not even a turn, it's defense because Pakistan still wouldn't be on the side. And three, India obviously would not be pro the UN because they are against the UN as our own linked states. So, yeah, please engage. Thank you.
So it's going to be their turns on peacekeeping, Arthur, Warren, Daniel's extension of like the escalation, and then Wayne. Everyone's ready? On their turns, they say India will decrease peacekeeping. But Daniel tells you throughout in summary that that's not the only incentive they have to continue doing it. They still want to be on the P5 to trade votes. But also, we also explained that these other countries have stayed on the P5 forever, and so that means that it's a different scenario with India. And we also say China's contributing more troops. And also, India wants to look good for other reasons. They still want to look like a good international steward. Most importantly, they don't wait this turn. They don't tell you how many peacekeepers go down. If we prove that traditional missions increase, that's still a decrease in conflict, that's good for us. Let's go to their second warrant. They say that other people will like hold the UN hostage, but we say, as Daniel points out, the G4 nations see that the reason why India got into the council in the first place was because they're historically big contributions to peacekeepers, not because they're holding them hostage, which means they'll increase peacekeepers. They don't weigh this turn either because we tell you that Germany and Japan aren't contributing any troops anyway. That has nothing to do with those, and those like Pakistan and Indonesia aren't likely to get on the council anyway. Let's go to Arthur Warren. It's clean conceded the Mukherjee evidence tells you that India is previously against offensive mandates in 11 and 12, which is why they would veto them on the council. We say that this means that there is a decrease in that there's a decrease in fatality, which means that countries don't pull out, which means that if you want to vote on the sheer amount of troops, it's probably going to be a wash because they don't weigh this, and we tell you that there's still a decrease in fatalities when you affirm. But where you get clean offense is the foreign evidence, which tells you that in the long term, traditional peacekeeping operations decrease the probability of conflict by 86% because their own Libya example turns against them because it leads to long-term conflict because they take one side of the issue. That means that we outweigh for a couple of reasons. This gets to his overview. He just says that a terror attack now will mean immediate escalation. That's clearly not true. As a result of 2 months ago, nothing escalated. They just say mediation doesn't work between China and the US because they play each other off. Our analysis is more nuanced that both sides don't want a war. That's why we tell you Pompeo was on the phone between India and Pakistan. No war happened. There's no uniqueness, which is the first weighing mechanism because tensions are already high. You don't know what you get when you negate. And also historical precedent. There's never been an escalation in nuclear war because Pakistan doesn't see it as a best interest. On their case, they do not do a good job extending the war. Pakistan going to the UNSC when India rejects the UNSC is like going to a restaurant last night, realizing it's closed and not being hungry anymore. We say that Pakistan still goes to terrorism. That's what the ToC evidence indicates, which is why the only way to stop that is to get India on the UNSC, which means they're more likely to respect the United Nations.